In a video I uploaded a few days ago, I discussed with you all what changed Timeline A so dramatically. We are going to call the original timeline Timeline A and the God of War 2018 timeline Timeline B. In this video, we are going to discuss the major plot points that may have changed Timeline A so much and why Prophecy didn't expect Kratos. Let's get right into it.
Baldur was never sent to find me. He was tracking her all along, not knowing she was only ashes.
If she had a plan for us, I trust it. Whatever it is. Besides, she hasn't been wrong yet.
First, let's break down Timeline A and talk about what we know so far. Ragnarok begun, which means the following. 1. We know the fire giants had appeared. Bring Mimir to Muspelheim for the first time, and he mentions that once Ragnarok begins, the fire giants will come. 2. We know that Skull and Hati ate the sun and moon. We also know that Baldur dies and Fimbulwinter had started. These are things that are confirmed within the game. Now, let's talk about Loki and his family. Loki's entire family was mentioned in some way in Timeline B, and it's safe to assume that they existed in Timeline A as well. But this leads to the confusing part. We know Loki existed in Timeline A because the serpent says, "I know the pain of your loss," because he lost his own parent. Loki is the father of the world serpent, and we know that at least in real Norse mythology, Loki dies. We all already know all of this information, it isn't new. But if Loki existed in Timeline A, which means that Kratos also had to exist in Timeline A. And that version of Kratos had to have married Faye to make Loki. This is where the contradiction lies. If Kratos and Faye married and had Loki in Timeline A, shouldn't the timeline flow exactly how Timeline B did? Except it didn't. Ragnarok started hundreds of winters later than Timeline B, which means Kratos didn't kill or fight Baldur, which is also safe to assume the journey had never happened, the journey which they went to the top of the mountain to spread their mother's ashes. Which in turn also means Kratos and Atreus never bonded. Before the journey, Kratos appeared here and there, and he left often. He was around the family, but was not very social. He provided for them and thought him providing things was enough, like food, a house, etc. It's safe to assume Kratos in Timeline A stayed this way, mean and distant, which probably meant Atreus hated his father for not being there. We learn in the book and in the game, as well as several interviews, Atreus always doubted himself because of his father. He never thought he was good enough for him, that he was weak, etc. Now this is the odd thing. Faye is the weirdest person in Timeline A and B. So here's what we know. She died in Timeline B. That much is clear. It's the first thing we find out about when the game begins. We never find out how she actually dies. Let's get into the major changes, how Timeline A and B are so dramatically different. This is my theory, however, it's very hard to disprove. I believe she never died in Timeline A. Faye's plan in Timeline B was very simple, but very complicated at the same time. She told Kratos she was going to die. She told him to go to the top of the mountain and scatter her ashes once she does, and to use specific trees that she had marked to cremate her. We learned that the trees that Kratos used were the protection seal around the forest which was hiding them. With them now gone, almost immediately they were found by Baldur, which jump-started their journey. She wanted them to go up there, start Ragnarok, and bond as father and son. As we learn through Brock and Sindri, Faye chose another path instead of fighting. She chose Kratos and Atreus. However, what if she continued fighting herself? This is what I believed happened in Timeline A. Instead of her choosing Kratos and Atreus, she kept up the fight, protecting the giants with her Leviathan axe. I think the relationship she had with Kratos was a quick one. She never needed to set up a protection forest for her family if she never chose Atreus to take up the fight. We learned in Timeline B, Faye had vanished from the world, leaving everyone thinking that she was dead, when in reality, she was just in the forest, hiding with Kratos and Atreus. Nurturing and preparing Loki. In Timeline A, she probably kept fighting until she died. Kratos had probably kept moving, probably out of fear of being a father. Considering what he did to his own family, it's actually understandable. Faye probably died in a confrontation with Odin or the Aesir, her biggest enemies. When she died, she was pretty much leaving Atreus, or better Loki, because that's what she called him in Timeline B as well. Loki was most likely taken, left in Asgard, leaving the real Norse mythology to happen the way the prophecy wanted it to happen. Loki will eventually cause Baldur's death in this timeline, just like the real mythology, creating Fimbulwinter. Skull and Hati eat the sun and moon. Ragnarok begins and everybody dies. Faye in Timeline B sees all of this and needs all of this to change. But why exactly does she want it all to change? Why does she want the flow of events to change? I'll talk about that more in the next part of this series, which I'm calling the Timeline series. But she wanted it to change so bad that she ended up taking her own life or dying in a way of her own choosing to jumpstart the journey. Her dying early means that the events that she foresaw, if she had died early, the events we saw at the mural at the end of the game, happen. Baldur dies earlier, Ragnarok starts earlier, and it all starts with her death. What she could possibly change, again, I will talk about in my next video. This will be a 3-part series like most of my series on this channel are. That's pretty much all I have to say on this topic. Again, I'm going to be talking about it a lot more on the channel. I'm going to be out of here. Thank you guys for listening. Deuces.